Sea of Stars is one of the best introductions to RPGs the genre has ever seen. All of the elements present here are light, to put it simply. I believe a child could complete this game with little assistance as long as they can read. With this simplicity, some elements of the game end up falling short compared to its inspirations and rivals in the space. The most glaring issue here being the story and characters.
Valir and Zale are boring characters because they do not fill either role of being a silent protagonist or an actual character. They needed more stakes other than Garl to motivate them throughout the story. I read a review that referred to them as superhero-esque characters, which I 100% agree with. I would have liked to see more scenes between just Valir and Zale to really establish the reason they are confident Solstice warriors. Another interesting scene could have been between them reflecting on why they think Erlina and Boograves are morally wrong, and why they cannot feel the same. The game just reads as if they brush it off and continue to go after the next dweller. I think the best scene with them is the aftermath of Garl's death. The game does quite a good job of making it feel like a lot of time passed between his actual passing and when the player gains control of him again. Garl is a one-note character that lacks the depth that could have sold me on his happy-go-lucky attitude. I think having Garl be more spiteful when people essentially tell him to fuck off could have made for an interesting conflict. It could also help get more dialogue out of Valir and Zale. For example, when Moraine sends him to blow up the roof during the first Dweller fight, I wish he rubbed it in Moraine's face afterwards. Valir and Zale could then tell him off, maybe causing an event in which Moraine learns to be more accepting of people's unique characteristics, instead of only believing in the Solstice warriors. Other than that, Garl is used very well as a motivational tool, but rarely provides any value when he is actually traveling with the party. Sarai is my personal favorite character that has plenty of similar issues to the other party members. She is incredibly interesting because she has one extremely obvious twist that comically gets pointed out by Valir and Zale, and another twist that actually shocked me and the characters. I adore her aesthetic, especially as a kid who loved the LEGO Ninjago franchise. I was enthralled when she ended up being a permanent party member, although I think she gets taken away a bit too frequently during the early parts of her introduction. I also like the fact that she gets to be the main focus of the second half, especially since the robot world is exclusively referred to as Sarai's world, which I found pretty funny. Other than that, she does not have a lot going for her. She hardly changes throughout the game, except at the very end, where you can see her being expressive in the credits. I really wish that she would have gotten a monologue when her world was introduced that explains everything in detail. We essentially get a summary, but that should have been supported by some more heavy dialogue, and maybe some more emotion. Roshan had the potential to be by far the highlight of the game, but the developers randomly decided that they should cut his story short. I have no idea why this choice made it into the final product, or the reasons behind forcing Roshan out of the game. It also leaves the player hanging because we get to see him again during the ending cutscene, but he gives a knowing nod and leaves again. No resolution, no more dialogue, no final goodbye, he just takes a foral and leaves. If I did not enjoy this game, I would have a lot more to say about how Roshan was implemented overall, especially with his endgame side quest. I have questions I wish I could ask the devs, but I will spare that conversation because I am lazy and do not wish to think about this absolute blunder for any longer than I have to. Beast is a fun character, but I really wish he was replaced by someone in the Clockwork Castle part of the game, since it would give a full party to play around with much earlier on. It is a shame that I feel nothing for Beast, considering they are supposed to be an endearing ray of hope that the party desperately needs. I also refuse to accept that they have otherworldly will. It just makes me feel like they were shoehorned in to try to justify Roshan leaving the party. I can imagine the party going, oh, at least we have Beast, even though they hardly contribute anything to the overall story. Other than the main party of six, the pirates were more annoying than endearing, although their renditions of the game's music is pretty fun. It gives good energy while playing wheels. I think they lean too far into stereotypes and making fun of stereotypes for me to really love them. The Fleshmancer, or a Forel, is a great antagonist, although he definitely looks like he was designed by an edgy middle schooler. I think the fact that the player sees the aftermath of his actions rather than his direct actions speaks to how deep the world building is. I also like the interactions between him and Roshan, and again, makes me disappointed in the ending. Moraine, or the Headmaster, is by far the most disappointing character in the entire game. The fact that he has gone through so much, fought so hard only to drop his staff and give up is insulting. He could have done so much more. Helping the party in any way would have saved his character. Instead, he sits in his house that he does not even help build for the rest of the game and has stock dialogue like any other NPC. Thoroughly disappointing. The story overall is quite disappointing as it never hits a conclusion. The game just has its final boss and ends, both times, without fanfare or a satisfying conclusion. Sometimes, stories are quite strong without a resolution, but for carefree games like this, the least I wanted was an ending that made me happy I saw the game all the way through. I have hopes that the future DLC, Throes of the Watchmaker, will help me answer some questions, but based on the name, I have a feeling it takes place before the main story of the game. Other parts of the narrative that bother me are simple coincidences that happen throughout the game. I'm normally completely unbothered by them, but I don't expect them in games that have such a rich world. For example, the fact that Garl just knows the sleeper would love the scent of bread upon awakening is intentionally ridiculous, but it leaves no room for me to wow at the idea. I just accepted that it would work and moved on.
I did get one oh shit moment during the story, which is when Sarai drops a bandana. It came with two realizations though. One was, damn, I have to play through the whole game for a second time? And wow, Sarai's even more badass than I thought, which are mostly good thoughts. I was nervous that the new overworld would be as large as the first one, but I was pleasantly surprised to see that it was smaller in scale. It also makes sense, since not many people live in that world, hence why Aforel chooses to reside there. There are a few show-don't-tell aspects of the story that I appreciate, mostly with character and enemy design. Solstice warriors are always sun and moon colored, which is really cool, and I could always guess enemy weakness based on their design, and because of how the game described what elements do. Undead mobs are weak to sun, ghostly mobs are weak to moon, etc. Branching off of that is gameplay in general. The combat feels very solid, with a great balance between strategy and actually interacting with the combat. On paper, timing blocks and attacks is a great way to keep the player engaged during combat, which is even better in a genre that many people outright avoid because it can be pretty boring. I personally do not like having to press the same timings over and over again throughout the game. It got really annoying by the end, especially with high damage skills like Moonring and Venom Flurry, since they require up to 15 timings that are overall very simple to do. The main attacks having a timing associated with them is fine, since those feel more important, but I think some of the timings detract from the combat, making some encounters unnecessarily long. The lack of an option to run is also frustrating, especially in New Game Plus.
The ability to switch party members on command is probably my favorite system. The fact that I was able to take advantage of my full party at any point is one of my favorite parts of the entire game, although I really only use 5 of them because Garl's pretty useless. Another system I enjoyed was the food. Only being able to carry 10 items at a time changed the way I thought about items, especially since late game food is more intense to craft. Multiple times I had to resource grind to make healing items before a fight just for comfort. I never had to grind for experience though, which is an intentional choice. The real leveling is the equipment that is bought or found throughout the world, which I think is a great way to do a modern style RPG. Not having to level grind at all, yet still feeling challenged, is a fresh experience that I haven't had in a long time, only matched by Pokemon Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. The exploration is great. Fast movement, extraordinary visuals, and good level design made for the strongest parts of the game for me. Glacial Peak is an incredible show-off of the stylized 16-bit graphics. With Mesa Island just sitting there below, walking those tightropes gave me real chills. Any area with water is a beautiful show-off of the physics. Each individual pixel moves with purpose when looking at splashing or moving waves. The seamless transition from a daylit area to a moonlit area is also a stunning show-off of the dynamic lighting. All of the detailed visual aspects add to the gameplay of platforming and puzzle solving. Quick side note, I think the puzzles are incredibly solid. They're not too difficult, but they're also not too simple. It's a really great balance for me. Navigating the world is impressive and gets more fun as the game goes on. The constant switch up throughout the game gives it a fresh coat of paint fairly consistently. I would say the large switch ups are getting the Grapplu, getting the Vespertine, getting the ability to go underwater, and getting the ability to fly. Being able to go underwater might be a controversial addition to that list, but I think it opens up some of the best gameplay areas while also giving a very unique view. My only complaint would be the overworld movement before accessing flight. It feels quite slow, which I think was to give a sense of grandness to the in-between areas, but it breaks the smooth traversal anytime that crossing areas is required. Relics are an accessibility option that are very well implemented, but offer little help to make parts of the game slightly more challenging. There are two sides of the relic coin. One is making the game very easy for far less experienced players, and the other making the game incredibly difficult for hardcore players. If you look at my backlog, you'll see that I have a decent amount of RPGs under my belt, but not nearly enough to be a professional. I really wanted a relic that would allow me to tweak the numbers at my discretion, such as decreasing my health by 15% or increasing boss health by 10%. to squeeze just a little bit more out of each fight. I found that most encounters were either far too difficult or far too easy. For example, the Triumvirate of Eminence, or the Three Words fight, was very difficult for me. While I'd like to blame my frustration on unfair locks and a move that brought everyone to 1 HP, I cannot do that without mentioning the fact that it was an outlier. I did every other boss fight on my first try. Otherwise, I only ever got a game over when I was ambushed by a group of enemies on low health and resources. On the other side, a fight that I found disappointingly easy was the fight with the Fleshmancer. The strange Space Invaders-esque minigame that interrupted the fight was the most difficult part. It was a long fight because I could not quite get the controls down while playing that action sequence, leading to the boss continually getting back up. It was tedious and boring, which also contributed to my further disappointment with the true ending. I think having a long fight is completely fine, especially for a final boss that the player has to work so hard for. However, having the RPG elements be so simple and everything else so needlessly complex ruins that ending just a bit more. At this point, I should address my overall strategy. As mentioned a few times before, I almost never swapped in Garl. I found his one damage type covered better by Valir in every way, along with his healing skill and grouping skill being outclassed by Roshan. With him out of the picture, I mainly kept Valir, Zale, and a rotation of Sarai, Roshan, and Beast as needed for locks. Another setup I commonly ran with was whoever had the most HP, since being able to take hits is such a valuable ability, simply having everybody who has the highest HP is a good way to stay alive until Roshan gets 12 MP or his ultimate. I used Valir and Zale mostly because they do not share elements with the rest of the party. I needed access to them at all times to reliably break locks. The other 4 party members share elements, so they felt more like the last piece of a lock puzzle whenever I needed a specific one.
Even with that, the game still throws specific lock combos and are impossible to break. This fact is the most frustrating part of the game. I wish that enemies could have a timer that has flames around it, but doesn't have any locks, instead of the clearly impossible ones. The game already kinda does this, but it still puts up those impossible locks. This can indicate one of the strong moves or a special phase, like Ramaya summoning her flesh and bone enemies. Some moves would never display as unbreakable, like True Terror from the birds. With the current lock problem though, the only consistent way to mitigate unfair locks is to use Disorient on Sarai, which seems fine, but for a majority of major boss fights, Sarai has very limited MP. This would cause a common situation where Sarai does not have enough resources to continually delay. The largest contributor to this problem are the locks that require a specific combo to break. Points simply do not accumulate fast enough to consistently break 2 lock combos in a row. As an example, a common lock combo would be 2 sun and 3 moon attacks in 3 turns, which, even if Valir and Zale both have a turn, is an impossible lock to break without the specific 2-point combo Soonering. This is insignificant, except for the fact that the combo meter is incredibly important to hold on to until the perfect moment in a fight. Another common combo is slash blend either sun or moon with 1 turn. This sucks even more because you need a live mana and 1 combo point, which is too specific for my taste. I was able to play around these situations, but the fact that the locks are so difficult to break without certain setups made for many frustrating moments throughout the game. The ideal maximum requirement for a lock break is either 2 live mana or 1 combo point, no more in my opinion. Shifting gears, the game has excellent side content for what is available. It has a good balance of smaller quests that take 10 minutes to complete and more elaborate quests that span the entire game. The quest in Dokari Village where you find 3 children hidden throughout the houses was a good time. The quest to find the way to the rest of someone's house in the Stone Mace's output was also particularly memorable, because I opened the chests immediately after finding them. The NPC proceeded to fake me out and berate me for stealing. I was surprised that a random character would do this, but I continued the conversation and realized that he was just being a jokester. I actually laughed out loud at this interaction. It was pretty good stuff. The longer quests are a mixed bag. I did enjoy revisiting the Solstice Shrines, which had been locked for the entire game, and finally going to the mysterious floating island, which unlocked the underwater shrines and continued Roshan's final questline. I did not enjoy having to go around and find the rainbow conches, or having to do the fights in the arena. There really needed to be a better way to do fast travel, if a requirement for the true ending was to go around and collect everything. With the arena, I despise whenever games make me go through multiple tiers of difficulty, especially when the fights in general are uninteresting. This type of arena mode can be done well, as seen in Hollow Knight. It offers unique enemies, it changes the arena, and gives unique boss fights. This is what arena challenges need to be, not more glorified random encounters. The questers of the Cerulean Expanse was fine. I looked at the answer, to be completely honest. It just wasn't a compelling riddle. The fight with the Queen was one of the more interesting fights within the game, although it wasn't that difficult. Finally, the quest with the Duke was probably my favorite. Going through the flooded graveyard again was quite fun, along with the creative implementation of a second flame color to take the party to a new location. Refinding Romaya was very, very cool, especially with all the callbacks to the first encounter. The side content is very good overall. I had very little problems going through all of it, which is quite refreshing for a modern game, considering many AAA games are making their game needlessly long just to justify a high price tag. Speaking of that high price tag, Sea of Stars costs $35 at full price, which makes complete sense. The game is self-published after all. I generally try not to let price bother me when playing through a game, especially since I buy most games during sales, this one included. That said, I do feel like $35 is a bit too much. I'm not sure what the discussion behind the price was, but I do think something like $25 would have been a perfect price for a game like this. Other indie games, like Neon White, Ultra Kill, and Slay the Spire go for it, and justify their price tags with a similar amount of quality to Sea of Stars. To me, $30 could have also worked, since it's half of the default $60 AAA price. Back to positive, the music for the game is very solid. Having Yasunori Mitsuda as a guest composer is actually an insane feat, considering how legendary he is in the RPG space. He contributed 12 tracks, which are all quite solid. The rest of the music is quite good too. Some of the music is a little grating, being like the Mountain Trail and the Sky-based tracks, but the annoying music is far and few between. I do think some of the area themes are over the top, such as the final dungeon music, but it's not bad music. Some of my favorite tracks include The Town of Mirth, Encounter Elite, and Sarah Night of Respite. Pivoting from that, I found Wheels to be an incredible side mode compared to most games. Is it pretty simple? Sure, but I found some NPC games to be quite challenging. I usually went with the Warrior and Mage, since I found them to be the best champions. The more gimmicky champions tended to give me over time, but I never used them because each game takes forever with them. They also provide small amounts of value for their niches. Let's take the Priest. It can't do any damage, it can level its duo quicker, and it can heal the main tower. The trade-off for damage is not high enough for it to be any good. Another example would be the Engineer. He does max damage to the bulwark and builds his own, but only does 1 damage to the actual tower. He is quickly outclassed by champions like the Archer and the Mage because their projectiles fly over the bulwark, making his abilities pointless to an extent. Wheels is unbalanced as hell, but I love it for that. It feels just right within the world and brings a much needed pace breaker to the game. Sea of Stars is a brilliant looking breath of fresh air that ends up falling flat. I cannot stop thinking about a quote from the creative director of Sabotage, Terry.
My personal nightmare is that because we've shown everything except for the script, right? So I'm just hoping it's not the weak link.
It made me incredibly sad to hear that from one of the people who poured so much time into this project, considering the challenges and expectations laid upon them. I hate to say that it is, and it now feels almost disrespectful to hone in on it, considering the rest of the game is quite good. I think some more cutscenes and dialogue in general would really help the characters fully develop throughout the story. A consistent miss throughout the game for me was when the party fights a boss and I just gain control of them immediately, or when they get ambushed and the party doesn't need to recoup or anything. Too many of these distractions can lead to bad pacing, but the pacing here is already brisk, so having some intimate cutscenes between the party would have been an easy way to show character growth and motivations. Even with my overall negativity, I am still looking forward to the multiple updates and eventual DLC that Sea of Stars gets, because like the Kickstarter backers before me, I believe in the project wholeheartedly. Thank you for watching.